I didn't think I'd remember the exact sound of a gavel hitting a podium, but I do. Sharp. Final. The kind of sound that ends arguments before they start. And when it cracked down that afternoon inside the review chamber of Ashford Vane Auction House, I watched a woman in her 60s, silver hair pinned back, reading glasses perched low, look up from a stack of documents and say the sentence that ended everything. The appraisal stands. Ms. Vance's credentials are, and always were, beyond question. That was Charlotte Ashford, majority shareholder and chairwoman of the board, the closest thing that building had to a queen, and a woman who did not attend grievance hearings unless she intended to end someone's career. She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking at the man standing 4 feet to my left, whose face had gone the color of old parchment. Gareth Colby. Senior auctioneer. 22 years with the house. The man who, 6 weeks earlier, had looked me up and down in front of a packed auction floor and decided I wasn't worth his time. I remember thinking, in that review room, that I should feel triumphant. Vindicated. Instead I just felt tired. The good kind of tired. The kind that comes after you've carried something heavy for a very long time and finally get to set it down. But to understand how a 27-year-old rare document appraiser ended up sitting across a mahogany table from the most powerful woman in the regional auction world, watching a veteran auctioneer's career come apart in real time, you have to go back 6 weeks, to a cold Saturday morning, and a crate nobody wanted. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I wasn't some outsider playing dress-up in a world I didn't understand. I'd spent 9 years earning my way into rooms like that one. A degree in archival science. For years apprenticed under a mentor who trusted almost no one. My own small shop, Vance Findlay Rare Books, tucked into a converted carriage house, where collectors from 3 states sent me things they were afraid to trust anyone else with. I authenticate documents for a living. I can look at ink oxidation and paper grain and tell you, within a decade, when something was written. That morning, I walked into Ashford Vane's preview room the same way I always did, quiet, unhurried, a little worn leather bag over my shoulder with my loupe and gloves inside. Gareth Colby didn't know any of that. He just saw a young woman in jeans and a canvas jacket, standing near the registration table, and made his decision before I'd said a single word. "This auction is for serious buyers," he said, loud enough for the 3 people behind me to hear. He laughed, not cruelly, exactly, more like a man amused by an inconvenience, and pushed my registration paddle back across the table toward me. "Might be more your speed downstairs. Estate sales running in the annex." I felt my face go hot. I felt every eye in that preview room land on me at once. And underneath all of it, quiet and familiar, I felt something else, the small internal tally I'd been keeping since I was 22 years old and first walked into a room full of men who assumed my interest in rare paper was a hobby, not a profession. Another mark. Another moment filed away. I smiled, the kind of smile that costs you something to hold, and I picked the paddle back up. I raised it again, steady, until he had no choice but to take my registration. To understand how it came to this, you have to understand what it's like to be excellent at something and invisible for it at the exact same time. My best friend, Mara Delgado, has worked beside me at the shop since we were 23, technically my assistant, but really the closest thing I have to family. Mara grew up 2 houses down from me. She was at my mother's funeral before she was at half my birthdays. She has a gift for numbers and a gift for reading rooms, and she was the only person who ever looked at what I do and said, without hesitation, "You're the best in the state at this. Everyone else just hasn't caught up yet." That morning, when I called her from the parking lot outside Ashford Vane, my voice still shaking with something between fury and humiliation, she didn't try to talk me down. "He said what to you?" she asked. And then, before I could even answer, "Nora, tell me you didn't just walk away." I hadn't. I'd raised the paddle. But it wasn't triumph in my chest driving home that night, it was the low, grinding certainty that Gareth Colby had made a very specific mistake, and he had no idea yet how specific it was. Here's what nobody in that preview room understood about me, including him. 2 days earlier, I'd spent 11 straight hours in my workshop authenticating a set of correspondence for a maritime museum that wanted to know if a captain's private letters, recovered from an estate sale in another county, were genuine. I'd worked under a single desk lamp with cotton gloves and a magnifier, cross-referencing wax seal impressions against a registry from a defunct 1880s shipping company, checking iron gall ink degradation against known samples, until I could say with absolute confidence, genuine, and worth roughly 4 times what the museum had budgeted. That's the work. Not glamorous. Not loud. Just relentless precision, hour after hour, until the truth of an object reveals itself whether people are ready to believe you or not. That's who walked into Ashford Vane that Saturday. Not a girl playing dress-up. A professional who had spent almost a decade training her eyes to see what other people walked straight past. And there was something specific I'd walked past, too, on my way to registration, a battered wooden crate sitting off to one side of the preview floor, water-stained, its lid loosely nailed, tagged with a single index card, Lot 114, Estate Miscellany, Assorted Papers, NO Reserve. Nobody was looking at it. Nobody was going to bid on it. It had the specific, unmistakable look of something the house had thrown in to pad up a sale, filler, dead weight, the auction equivalent of a junk drawer. I looked inside anyway. Because that's what I do. Underneath a layer of ruined ledger paper, I found a bundle of letters wrapped in oilcloth, their seal impressions still faintly visible, a crest I recognized instantly from the very registry I'd been studying 2 nights before. My pulse did something complicated. I didn't say a word to anyone. I just closed the lid, gently, and walked to registration, where a man decided I wasn't serious enough to hold a paddle. I went home that night and I didn't cry, though I wanted to. I sat at my kitchen table with Mara across from me and a legal pad between us, and I made a decision that had nothing to do with proving Gareth Colby wrong in front of a crowd, and everything to do with proving him wrong on paper, in a way no one could argue with, dismiss, or laugh off a second time. If he wanted to treat this as a game of who looked serious, I was going to make sure the only thing left standing at the end of it was the truth. The next morning, I didn't go back to the auction house. I went to my own workshop, and I started building a case the way I'd build an appraisal report, methodically, with evidence, with nothing left to interpretation. First, I pulled every public record I could find on Lot 114's provenance, the estate it came from, the family name attached to it, the chain of ownership going back as far as the county archive would let me. Second, I called Professor Adiz Bello, a maritime historian I'd worked with twice before on museum authentications, and asked her, carefully, without tipping my hand, whether she'd be willing to independently examine a set of letters if the opportunity arose. She'd said yes before I'd even finished the sentence. She trusted my eye more than I sometimes trusted it myself. Third, and this was the part that mattered most, I filed a formal written complaint with Ashford Vane's Internal Ethics Office, documenting exactly what Gareth Colby had said, when, and in front of whom, along with copies of my appraiser's license, my professional certifications, and a request, buried in careful, procedural language, for the house's standard buyer eligibility review, a hearing any registered bidder is entitled to request if they believe they were wrongfully denied. Participation. Mara thought I was overcomplicating it. Just show up and bid, she said. Let the money do the talking. The money's not the point, I told her. If I just win, he tells himself I got lucky. I needed on the record that I was right the whole time, and that he was wrong to ever stop me. I lined up 3 character witnesses from the appraisal community, requested that the auction house's compliance officer be present at the sale, and quietly, very quietly, reached out to a contact I had inside the house's registration office, a woman named Priya who'd always been kind to me, and asked her to make absolutely certain Lot 114 stayed exactly where it was on the docket. Untouched. Unadvertised. Waiting. Then I waited too. 6 days of silence, checking my email obsessively, wondering if the complaint had even reached anyone who mattered, until, on a Thursday evening, a single reply landed in my inbox from an address I didn't recognize. It was 4 lines long. It confirmed my eligibility review had been granted. And it was signed, simply, Charlotte Ashford. I read it twice before I understood what it meant. The chairwoman herself was going to be in the room. Saturday came back around faster than I was ready for. The Ashford Vane sale floor was fuller than usual, word travels in small professional circles, and apparently my little complaint had traveled with it. Gareth Colby stood at the podium in his usual grey suit, gavel in hand, looking exactly as unbothered as he had 2 weeks earlier, and I understood then that he genuinely had no idea what was coming. Mara sat beside me in the third row, gripping my hand so tightly I lost feeling in 2 fingers. Professor Bello sat 2 rows back with a folder in her lap. And near the side aisle, quiet and composed in a charcoal blazer, sat Charlotte Ashford, watching the room the way a hawk watches a field. The early lots went the way they always do: furniture, silverware, a few unremarkable oil paintings. Then Colby's assistant wheeled out a battered wooden crate, and I watched his face do something very close to boredom. Lot 114, he said, barely glancing at his notes. Estate miscellany. Assorted papers. No reserve. Do I hear an opening bit of? I raised my paddle before he finished the sentence. He looked at me the way you'd look at a bird that had flown into a window, mild surprise, quickly replaced by something closer to condescension. This one's just paper, miss. Ledgers, mostly water damage. I'd hate for you to waste your. I'll take the whole lot, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. Put the whole lot under my name. A ripple went through the room, not because of the bid, which was modest, but because of the silence that followed it. Colby hesitated, gavel hovering, clearly weighing whether to simply move the lot along and be done with it. That's when Charlotte Ashford stood. Before this lot closes, she said, and the whole room turned toward her at once, I'd like the floor's permission to introduce Professor Adiz Bello, maritime historian, and to enter into record an independent authentication request already filed with this house regarding the contents of Lot 114. Colby's composure cracked for the first time, not dramatically, just a flicker, the flicker of a man realizing the ground under him had shifted while he wasn't looking. Professor Bello stood, opened her folder, and read aloud, in careful academic language, exactly what she and I had already confirmed independently and separately 3 days earlier, that the letters inside that crate were, with overwhelming physical and documentary evidence, the surviving correspondence of a shipowner's wife who had sailed on a vessel presumed lost for over a century, correspondence that filled a documented gap in the region's maritime record and carried, conservatively, a value nearly 40 times what the crate had been listed for. The room didn't gasp, exactly, auction rooms rarely do, but I felt it change temperature. I felt every assumption Gareth Colby had made about me 2 weeks earlier collapse quietly in the space of about 90 seconds. Charlotte Ashford didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Mr. Colby, she said, turning toward the podium, would you like to explain to this floor why a bidder with a professional appraiser's license and 2 independent expert confirmations was nearly denied registration for this auction 3 weeks ago, on the grounds that she, and I'm reading directly from the complaint, didn't look like a serious buyer? I don't think I'll ever forget the silence that followed. Colby's mouth opened, then closed. He glanced toward me, not with hostility anymore, just something smaller, something closer to shame, and he said, quietly, into a microphone that carried it to every corner of that room, that was a mistake on my part. I apologized to Ms. Vance. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was, without question, the single most satisfying sentence I have ever heard another human being say out loud. Charlotte Ashford closed the matter the way she'd opened it, briskly, formally, without wasted words. Lot 114 is confirmed to Ms. Vance at the standing bid. This house will be reviewing its registration protocols effective immediately. Then she looked at me, just for a moment, something almost like respect passing between us. Congratulations on your acquisition, Ms. Vance. The gavel came down. And somewhere behind me, I heard Mara exhale like she'd been holding her breath for 6 weeks. Word moves fast in small professional worlds, and within a month, the story of Lot 114 had traveled well past the walls of Ashford Vane. Professor Bellow's paper on the letters was picked up by 2 maritime history journals. My shop's phone started ringing with a kind of frequency it never had before, collectors, museums, even a documentary producer, all wanting to talk to the appraiser who'd found a lost shipwreck's voice in a crate nobody else had bothered to open. But the part that mattered most to me happened quietly, 3 weeks after the sale, in a follow-up letter I received from Charlotte Ashford's office. Ashford Vane had adopted a formal, written registration policy: no bidder, regardless of age or appearance, could be denied a paddle without documented cause, and any refusal now required sign-off from a compliance officer, on the record, with the bidder's right to immediate appeal. They called it, in the dry language of institutional memos, the fair registration standard. I call it, privately, the thing that made sure the next 20-something woman who walks into that preview room with a worn leather bag and a trained eye doesn't have to fight for the right to be taken seriously before anyone's even seen what she's capable of. Gareth Colby still works there, as far as I know, though I heard he transferred out of the main auction floor and into estate consultations, a quieter role, further from the podium. I don't think about him much anymore. I think, instead, about the moment I opened that crate and nobody else in the room understood what they were looking at, and how being underestimated, it turns out, is sometimes just the universe handing you a head start nobody else knows you have. Mara still works beside me every day at the shop. The letters from Lot 114 now sit, properly conserved, in a maritime museum 2 counties over, on loan under my name, with a small brass placard that credits their discovery. I keep a photograph of that placard taped inside my desk drawer, not for pride, exactly, more as a reminder. Some people will look at you and see only what they expect to see. Your job isn't to convince them otherwise in the moment. Your job is to be so unmistakably right that the record does it for you. If this story hit home for you, if you've ever had someone underestimate you the moment you walked into a room, drop a comment and tell me about the crate nobody else thought to open. And if you want more stories like this one, make sure you're subscribed, because there's always another lot worth bidding on.